Good day guys! We are the group 2 and in this video, we are going to discuss about Melanie Klein and her object relations theory. The topics covered are the following. Melanie Klein's biography.
Melanie Klein was a 20th century psychologist who specialized in child psychology. She also contributed popularized the theory of object relations. She was born on March 30, 1882 and the youngest of 4 children of Dr. Maurice Reyes and second wife Libusa Doge Reyes. Klein has 2 sisters, Emily, the oldest and favored by their father, and Sidonie, who was 4 years older than her and taught her arithmetic and reading. She also has 1 brother, Emmanuel, who tutored her and helped her pass her entrance exam and was 5 years older. Klein believed that her birth was unplanned, which led to the feeling of being rejected by her parents. She sees her father as distant, and although she idolized her mother, she felt suffocated by her. Klein's father was a physician, and despite her father's meager income, Melanie aspired to become a physician. Melanie's father died when she was 18, and 3 years after his death, at the age of 21, Melanie married Arthur Klein, her late brother's best friend. Klein was not happy the entire marriage as she believed that it prevented her from achieving her goal of becoming a physician. Nevertheless, she had 3 children with her husband, Milita, Hans, and Erich. In 1909, Klein's family moved to Budapest, and there she met Sandor Ferenczi, the person who introduced her into the world of psychoanalysis and a member of Freud's circle. In 1914, Klein's mother died. This made her depressed and enter an analysis with Ferenczi. In the same year, Klein's youngest child, Erich, was born. It was also the year that she discovered Freud and read Freud's On Dreams. She was deeply taken by psychoanalysis that she trained her son Erich according to the Freudian principles. She also tried to analyze her other 2 children, but eventually went to other analysts. Klein and her husband separated in 1919, and after the separation, she established a psychoanalytic practice in Berlin and made her first contribution to the psychoanalytic literature with a paper dealing with her analysis of Erich. Years later, Klein ended her relationship with Ferenczi as she was not satisfied with her analysis. She then began an analysis with Carl Abraham, but only after 14 months, Abraham died. This made Klein decide to begin a self-analysis. In 1926, Klein was invited by Ernest Jones to London to analyze his children and deliver a series of lectures on child analysis. This resulted in her first book, The Psychoanalysis of Children. A year after, she took up a permanent residency in England. When Klein's son Hans died in 1934, Milita blamed her mother for his death and maintained that her brother committed suicide. On the same year, Milita and her psychoanalyst husband moved to London. She began an analysis with Edward Glover, one of Klein's rivals. This made them more estranged personally. Klein considers herself as a Freudian, but neither Anna nor her father accepted her analytic technique on children. Her indifferences with Anna began while the Freuds were still in Vienna, but it climaxed when they moved to London in 1938. Before Anna's arrival, the School of Psychoanalysis was steadily becoming the Kleinian school. The conflict between Klein and Anna Freud never subsided as both claimed to be more Freudian. Finally, in 1946, the British Society accepted 3 training procedures. The traditional one of Melanie Klein, the one advocated by Anna, and a middle group that accepted neither training school but was more eclectic in its approach.
Introduction to Objects Relation Theory.
Object relations theory is a variation of Freud's psychoanalytic theory. But instead of suggesting that humans are motivated by sexual, biological, and aggressive drives, this theory emphasizes interpersonal relationships of humans. This theory states that humans are motivated by the need for contact with other people, the need to form bonds in relationships. To simplify, object relations theorists see human contact and not sexual drive as a prime motivation in shaping behavior and personality. Object relations theory is best explained by KLEIN through an infant-mother relationship rather than an infant-father relationship. It is also stressed that early family interactions, especially that of the infant and the mother, significantly affect the child's personality development. If KLEIN is the mother of object relations, then Freud himself is the father. In this theory, objects are not referred to as inanimate entities, rather, the significant people in an individual's life. Objects are usually persons, parts of the person, or symbols of any of these, while the primary object is the mother of the child. This theory is KLEIN's theory of the unconscious, stressing the importance of the first 4 or 6 months of the child after birth.
The psychic life of an infant.
KLEIN believed that infants start life with an inherited predisposition to reduce anxiety that they experience by conflicts between life and death instincts. Thus, the formation of the two identified physical life of infants, fantasies and objects. Fantasy is the state of mind of an infant during early stages of development and the physical representation of unconscious instincts. KLEIN assumed that infants possess an active fantasy life. The infant's basic fantasies are unconscious images of good and bad breasts. Moreover, fantasy is the imaginary embodiments of physical desires and impulses. These are sensed by the child both emotionally and psychologically. They're vibrant because a child can say the difference between imagination and reality until later in life. Frustrations and discomfort are perceived as if they were a violent force invading. It resembles the insane world of adult hysteria. Except for children, it's natural. Moreover, KLEIN spelled fantasy into fantasy so as not to confuse this word for its general meaning. Humans have innate desires and instinct. Herewith, drive must have objects. MELANIE believed that infants relate these drives to external objects both in fantasy and reality. She emphasized the infant's relationship with objects like breast, penis, etc., which she described as being internalized by the child, the object in concrete and physical terms. Inherently, drives are guided words towards objects. The baby seeks milk from the breast of the mother. Breasts that contain milk are good, and those that do not are undesirable. Object universe consists of gratifying and aggressive parts of the infant's physical world during the first few months.
The Unconscious Fantasy Theory.
KLEIN's theory of the unconscious revolved mainly on the fantasy life of an infant from birth. She marked that anxieties of an infant were processed through feeding and relating to other people, as objects and part objects, and these unconscious instincts of an infant should not be confused to that of adults. She developed this theory from her work with children, analyzing them through toys and roleplay. Through close observation, MELANIE was able to interpret children's inner working minds. This led her to believe that children projected their anxieties on their toys and sketches about their part objects of their parents. The breast, the penis, the unborn babies in the womb of the mother. They carry out their fantasies of violence, but also their need for playful reparation. She also stated that the children have their unconscious view of the good and the bad. like an empty stomach is bad, while a full one is good. This led her to believe that when children suck fingers while sleeping, they are probably dreaming of sucking their mother's breast. Similarly, hungry infants who cry and kick their legs are fantasizing that they are kicking or destroying the bad breasts. Regarding the famous controversy with Anna Freud, KLEIN insisted that children could bear the analytical interpretation thrown to them. KLEIN went full in, did not hold back, nor sugarcoat her words. In one of her observations, she also stated that when children are given the freedom to express their fantasies which were then interpreted, the level of anxiety decreases. KLEIN also felt that through analyzing young children, she was able to reveal vital signs of development that her colleagues missed, as they were only keen on analyzing adults.
Positions.
To reduce the conflict produced by good and bad images, KLEIN came up with positions or ways of dealing with both internal and external objects. It was called positions rather than stages because these are not a period or phase of development that a person undergoes, but the state of being that is experienced alternately throughout life. The first position is called the paranoid schizoid position. Let's first define what is paranoid. Paranoid is the ego's perception of the external world. This is subjective and fantastic instead of objective and real. Thus, persecutory feelings are considered to be paranoid. Second is the schizoid. What is a schizoid? A schizoid is a hatred and rage are directed towards the bad breast, and the feelings of love and comfort are to be associated with the good breast. Paranoid schizoid position occurs during the first 4 to 6 months of an infant and is rooted in a death instinct called thanatos. Paranoid schizoid is a way of organizing experiences that includes both paranoid feelings of being persecuted and a splitting of internal and external objects into good and the bad. To simplify, paranoid schizoid position is the splitting of the object into both good and bad with no integration between them. The child separates both his ego and his object and separately projects his love and hating emotions or the instincts of life and death into different sections of the mother or breast. In this sense, the maternal object is divided into an evil breast that is associated to a mother who feels frustrating, persecutory, and hated, and the good breast that is associated with a mother who is loved and gratifying. The second position is called the depressive position. KLEIN describes the depressive position begins after the paranoid schizoid position, which is at the first year of the child or about 6 months. KLEIN describes that the person may oscillate between these two manic depressive states. The initial depressive position is a significant step in integrative development which occurs when the infant discovers that the hated bad breast and the loved good breast are one and the same. The mother begins to be recognized as a whole object who can be good and bad rather than the two-part objects, one good and one bad. Love and hate, along with external reality and the internal fantasy, can now also begin to coexist. The depressive position is different from paranoid schizoid position, wherein the good object is love and the bad object is hated. Thus, the child feels grief that the good object will be destroyed and fears the possible loss and separation from the mother. The infant wanted to protect the loved object, his mother, along with the desire to protect the mother it viewed whole, who is capable of good and bad, and endangered, destructive forces were projected. The ambivalence internalized by the infant greatly caused anxiety and troubled feelings. In addition, depressive position is a fear of losing the loved object, together with a feeling of guilt from wanting to destroy the object. This is the time when the baby feels grief and begins to cry.
The depressive position only gets resolved once the child felt that reparations are made and be convinced that his mother won't get separated.
Psychic defense mechanism.
The first defense mechanism is introjection. This is best described when an infant takes in milk from his mother's breast, literally. This breast milk is taken as a symbol of life and love, as well as the opposite of it, which is experiencing hunger pains. These internalized introjections from the baby's ego and the infant's unconscious works to keep the good breast as a symbol of life and love, safe from the bad breast that bears feeling of hate as well as aggression. According to KLEIN, introjection is a defense mechanism against the anxiety and the fear of the horrible inner world of the child. The child assumes itself populated by bad, aggressive, and tormenting objects and attempts to introject the external good objects. In other words, the child tries to replace the internal bad object with the external good object. So, introjection is a defense mechanism to protect not only the me, but also the internal good objects. The second defense mechanism is called projection. Projection as a way to escape the destruction by the malevolent breast. Infants might project their implicit paranoid feelings to other individuals. Nevertheless, others project positive feelings of love and comfort to other people, all while viewing themselves as empty and worthless. This defense mechanism is evident for people later in life when they project the feeling of hatred and aggression to other people. Unfortunately, this results in racism, war, genocide, and other devious acts. We also see it in people who employ constructive thoughts or cynical biases, doing just what they wish to see to be happy. The third defense mechanism is called splitting. Splitting is the mental separation of objects into good and bad, and the repression of the bad and anxiety-provoking aspects. It is said that the infants first experience splitting with their primary caregiver. The caregiver is good when all the infant's needs are met, and bad when their needs are not satisfied. Splitting happens when at the same time a person, especially a child, cannot hold two opposing thoughts or feelings in mind, thereby holding the contrasting feelings separate and concentrating only on one of them. Intense anxiety resulting from the pain of birth, hunger, and anger must be handled by the Kleinian infant. The baby's fantasy divides the mother's breast into the good that cares and nourishes him, and the bad breast that withholds and persecutes the baby. Splitting is a way of protecting the ego from any negative emotions. Klein wrote that the ego is incapable of splitting the object, internal and external, without a corresponding splitting taking place within the ego. The more sadism prevails in the process of incorporating the object, and the more the object is felt to be in pieces, the more the ego is in danger of being split. The fourth and the last psychic defense mechanism is called the projective identification. Projective identification is a psychic defense mechanism in which infants split off unacceptable parts of themselves, project them onto another object, in this case a person, and finally introject them back into themselves in a changed or distorted form. By taking the object back into themselves, infants feel that they have become like that object, that is, they identify with that object. Projective identification takes projection one stage further. Instead of projecting unwanted split-off parts onto the object as though onto a blank screen, then either idealizing them or feeling persecuted, projective identification is the fantasy of projecting a part of oneself into the other person or object. The split-off parts become fantasized as having taken possession of the mother's body, and she becomes identified with them. Unlike projection, in projective identification, there is a blurring of boundaries. The object being projected into, example the mother, is an extension of the baby, therefore in his omnipotent fantasy, it can be controlled by him. And indeed, through subtle manipulations, the recipient can be made to feel and act in accordance with the projective fantasy. The infant, through various behaviors, can make his carer experience his frustration.
Internalizations.
The APA Dictionary of Psychology defines internalization as the non-conscious mental process by which the characteristics, beliefs, feelings, or attitudes of other individuals or groups are assimilated into the self and adopted as one's own. Meanwhile, object relation theorists referred to internalization as the introjection or taking in and adoption of ideas of a person of the external aspects and organize it into a meaningful psychological framework. In simpler terms, internalization is how we perceive or internalize what we see in our surroundings and apply it to oneself. In KLEINian theory, there are three important internalizations: the ego, superego, and Oedipus complex. Ego, or one's sense of self, was believed by KLEIN to reach maturity earlier than Freud assumed. While Freud hypothesized that ego exists at birth, he attributed the complex psychic functions not until the third and fourth year. Freud believed that a young child is dominated by the id. On the other hand, KLEIN ignored the id and based her theory on the ego's ability to sense both destructive and loving forces, and manage them through splitting, projection, and introjection. Furthermore, KLEIN believed that despite the ego being unorganized at birth, it is already capable of feeling anxiety, use defense mechanisms, and form early object relations. The evolution of ego begins during the infant's first feeding. As the infant is fed with both experience of good and bad breast milk, wherein the good breast milk contains love and security, and the bad breast milk lacks love and security. The infant interjects the good and bad breast, and all the other things that they will experience are evaluated based on that first experience and how they relate to it, whether good or bad. This serves as a focal point for further expansion of ego. But before the unification and integration of ego, it needs to be split into the good me and the bad me. This is in order to balance and manage the good and the bad aspects of external objects, as depicted from the experience of the good and the bad breast. Through this, as the infant matures, its perception of the world is more realistic, not partially viewed, and the ego becomes more integrated. Next is superego, or the self-critical conscience. The difference between Freud and KLEIN's view on superego is that Freud conceptualized superego as consisting of two subsystems: the ego ideal, which produces inferiority feelings, and conscience that results in guilt. However, KLEIN observed that superego, which she believed to manifest much earlier than Freud speculated, does not actually produce guilt but terror. The early superego was seen to be harsher and crueler. In addition, it grows along the Oedipal process rather than being its byproduct as Freud assumed. In superego, for instance, as a child, we avoid doing something against a rule brought by being excessively scared for something to happen, or the consequence. For example, a scare by the parents, which somehow this fear blew out of proportion from reality. The young children's fear of unrealistic danger resides in the infant's destructive instinct, which is experienced as anxiety. The ego then mobilizes the life instinct or libido against the death instinct and manages the anxiety. However, the ego is a pair of life and death instinct, which cannot be completely separated, and thus it is forced to defend itself from its own actions. The early ego defense lays the foundation of the development of the superego, whose violence is a reaction towards the ego's self-defense against its destructive tendencies. The early superego was harsh and cruel, which is said to be responsible for many antisocial and criminal tendencies. However, this gradually loses severity and turns into realistic conscience. By the fifth or sixth year, the superego arouses little anxiety but a greater feeling of guilt. Lastly is the Oedipus complex. While Freud believed that Oedipus complex occurs at the phallic stage, KLEIN claimed it begins during the earliest months of life, during conception, and reaches the climax at the genital stage. During the Oedipal stage, there are those fantasies of the child towards the Oedipal couple or the same-sex parent and the desire to usurp their position, such that a girl wanting to replace her mother's place, yet fears the retaliation from their parents for their fantasies. The child's Oedipal development process differed in female and male. In female Oedipal development, at the beginning, the girl considers her mother's breast as good and bad. Then at around 6 months, she views the breast more positively than negative. And then, she perceives her mother full of good things, which then leads her to wonder how babies are made. Later on, she fantasizes that her father's penis fills her mother's riches, including babies, which leads her to develop a positive relationship with it. She then fantasizes that her father will fill her with babies too. If the female Oedipal stage proceeds smoothly, the girl takes a feminine position with a positive relationship with both parents. However, in some cases, the little girl will consider her mother as a rival and fantasize to rob her mother of her father's penis and steal her babies. This further increases the anxiety and fear of retaliation from her mother, which can only be relieved after giving birth to a healthy baby. The penis envy was caused by the girl's desire to internalize her father's penis and receive a baby, resulting in a desire for an external penis. Meanwhile, in male Oedipal development, at first, the boy views her mother's breast as good and bad, similar to the female Oedipal development. Later on, during the early stages, his oral desire shifts from her mother's breast to his father's penis, and takes a feminine position, developing a homosexual attitude towards his father. KLEIN believed that this passive attitude is a prerequisite for the boy to develop a healthy heterosexual relationship with his mother. As he matures, he develops impulses to bite off his father's penis and murder him, and this feeling caused him to develop a fear of retaliation from his father. The boy's Oedipus complex is partially resolved by the castration anxiety, but the most important factor is his ability to create a positive relationship with both of his parents. For both girls and boys, a healthy resolution of the Oedipus complex depends on their ability to allow their mother and father to come together and have a sexual intercourse. No remnant of rivalry remains. The children's positive feelings towards both parents later serve to enhance their adult sexual relations.
Later views on object relations theory.
Margaret Meller. Meller believed that the sense of identity of children rests on 3 different steps with their mother. First, infants rely on their mothers for their basic needs. Next, developing a safe symbiotic relationship between the mother and the children. Third, children emerge from their mother's safe circle and thereafter establish their separate individuality. Heinz Kohut. For Kohut, the moment when the parents and the people around the children treat them as if they have their own version of individuality, the children's sense of self will start to develop. In addition, after developing his innovations on object relations theory, he also emphasized narcissism, in which he strongly believed that narcissism isn't necessarily unhealthy, as there are healthy and unhealthy forms of narcissism. John Bowlby's attachment theory. John Bowlby is a British psychologist who described attachment theory as lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. Other theorists who viewed attachment as a learned process, but for Bowlby, he viewed it as an evolutionary process. Contrary to the other theorists who suggested that food forms attachment, Bowlby specified that it was the nurturance and responsiveness that determines attachment. Mary Ainsworth in The Strange Situation. The Strange Situation research pertains to wherein children between the ages of 12 and 18 months were being studied as they responded to a situation in which they were left alone briefly and then reunited with their mothers. Ainsworth described three major styles of attachment. These are secure attachment, ambivalent insecure attachment, and avoidant insecure attachment.
Psychotherapy.
Mahler, Kohut, and Bowlby were all psychoanalysts trained in orthodox Freudian practices along with Klein, but each modified psychoanalytic treatment to fit their own theoretical orientation. Klein uses the approach of play therapy as a substitute for Freudian dream analysis and free association. She believes that young children express their conscious and unconscious wishes through play therapy. Klein provides several small toys, pencil and paper, paint, crayons, and other items for each child to promote negative transference and violent fantasies. Klein's patients often verbally attack her, which she then takes as an opportunity to interpret the unconscious motives behind the attacks. Kleinian therapy aimed to mitigate depressive anxieties, persecutory feelings, and the harshness of internalized objects. She encourages her patients to revisit their emotions and fantasy, but with a therapist guiding them and pointing out the difference between fantasy and reality and unconscious and conscious. She also allows her patients to express both negative and positive transference, as this allows them to understand unconscious fantasies. Once all these are done, the patients would feel less persecuted, reduce their depressive anxiety, and would be able to express frightening internal objects onto the world. This use of psychoanalysis with children was not well accepted by other analysts during the 1920s to 1930s. Anna Freud, who showed a strong opposition towards Klein's analysis, believed that children who were still attached to their parents could not develop transference on their therapist, making psychoanalysis on children ineffective. But Klein, on the other hand, believed that both healthy and disturbed children should be psychoanalyzed, as disturbed children could benefit from the treatment and those healthy children would profit from the prophylactic treatment.
Melanie Klein's overall contributions to child analysis.
Psychoanalysis was one of the most influential works in psychology about understanding the conscious and subconscious to interpret the patient's mental state and also to treat patients with mental illness. Melanie Klein was a pioneer in treating children and was the first to use psychoanalysis towards them. She used play and toys to help children in discussing their psychological issues, known as play therapy. Just by observing and analyzing how children play and interact, Klein built onto the work of Freud's unconscious mind. Her emphasis on the role of the mother-child and interpersonal relationship on development also had a major influence on psychology. During her practice, she would give a child an individual set of small toys, and she will make interpretations on the unconscious significance of the play. And with this, she will be able to analyze children in her work with children. Klein wanted to understand how human beings evolve from the primitive pleasure-seeking impulses of early infancies to mature adaptation of late life, and in particular, she wants to know what might go wrong on this journey, giving rise to the neurotic adaptation of adults. She once described the difficulty of young infant situation, weak, utterly at the mercy of adults, unable to grasp of what is that people around. It is in fact with their own alternate reality, an independent point of view. Melanie Klein took interest in following up psychoanalytic theory and using this to contribute to the mental welfare of the children. Klein was recognized as one of the first psychoanalysts who devoted her work to children. Her techniques were the framework, and her works contributed to the clinical training and intervention that are being used in today's children and adolescents. The very first patient of Klein went to her home in Berlin in 1919. She dealt with children who have suffered from obsessional anxiety, sleeplessness, paranoia, etc. Some of them have severe night terrors, soiling, and neurosis, inhibition in learning, and sometimes over-psychotic features. Some of these accounts that were observed during her analysis are found and published in the Psychoanalysis of Children. She understood that children would not simply share their feelings and thoughts merely by lying on a couch and assuming that they would have a conversation with their parents about how they feel. Instead, Melanie discovered a method where she would let children draw on a piece of paper while interacting with them, or just play with the kids with their wooden toys on the table, and where she would take various roles and lower herself to communicate with her patients. As she stated that it is when a child plays with small toys that we can see the expression of opposing emotion most distinctly. She showed real compassion towards her little patient, so she would always focus on the level of the patient's unconscious anxiety, which is causing their suffering. Klein's method is widely used today by some therapists. Although Klein's child analysis was accepted by others in the same field as her, some disagreed with her theory. Anna Freud, who is the daughter of Sigmund Freud, who was also pioneering her model of psychotherapy in the early 1920s, contradicts Klein's idea. There's a disagreement between psychotherapists on the matter of the rise of superego in children. Melanie Klein and Anna Freud disagreed on the idea that children show aggressive behavior pattern, which marks the beginning of superego, which can be observed during 0 to 1 year old or the oral stage, while Anna claimed that children only manifest such pattern or behavior during 3 to 6 years old or the phallic stage, which is similar to his father's pioneering theory. Anna's argument was when you interpret children, it is not the same as adults' free association. It has to take a considerable amount of time to assess the children's behavior, as well as psychological problems, and also the right amount of sessions to understand the child expression and language to make a deep relation analysis.
Melanie Klein vis-a-vis Sigmund Freud.
During Klein's career, her theoretical works was incorporated with Freud's theory, and in this table I will be showing you the differences of both theories. Klein emphasizes interpersonal relationship, and Sigmund Freud emphasizes biologically based drives. Klein emphasizes the intimacy and nurturing of the mother, whilst Freud emphasizes the power and control of the father. Klein said behavior is motivated by human contact and relationships. Freud says behavior is motivated by sexual energy or the libido. Klein stressed the importance of the first 4 or 6 months of life, wherein Freud emphasized the first 4 or 6 years of life.
Critical evaluation.
Object relation theory continues to be popular and remains influential until today. Klein, with her unabashed disagreements with Freudian theory and revolutionary thinking, made a huge contribution as one of the key figures of psychoanalysis. However, despite its influence, it has slow-generated research compared to the attachment theory. Object relations' most useful feature is its ability to organize the behavior of infants but lacks the same feature beyond the early childhood years. Klein's work was seen with violence and negative bias to the infant's fantasy world. The theory then displays a high level of internal consistency and rated low on parsimony.
The last part is Klein's influence on feminism. A remarkable influence of Klein was done through Dorothy Dinnerstein, an American activist and academic writer. It was because of the well-known book published by Dinnerstein in 1976, entitled The Mermaid and the Minotaur. This book was written concerning Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis, more particularly on Klein's. Dinnerstein's arguments point out the inevitable possibility of aggression and sexism in a child's upbringing when raised exclusively by the mother, which is a woman. Points were made, so she thought and proposed that the solution of this is the equal sharing of responsibilities of both men and women, the father and the mother of the child. It was clear that Dorothy Dinnerstein was a feminist, even though during her time when her theories were not widely accepted, she stood up on her position by arguing that it is easier for women than men to see what's wrong with the world than men have run. Here is an illustration about how Melanie Klein influenced and contributed to feminism in the past. Klein influenced Dinnerstein, which manifested in her book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur. And that book was known during the time of second wave feminism, which was a period of feminist activity. Even though it began in the United States in the early 1960s, it lasted roughly 2 decades. It quickly spread across the Western world, intending to increase equality for women by gaining more than just enfranchisement.